What's up, everyone? It is the Beast, Brian London. If you don't know who I am, I'm a 25-year media vet here in South Florida. Now, for some of you that are tuning into the channel for the first time, you're going to look at the other videos and say, wait, they're all about sports. And that is true. But this is a conversation I thought we had to have, regardless of whether it was about my topics of interest or not that I normally cover on the channel. Now, I can tell you, coming up down the line, this channel is going to spread its wings a little bit and cover more than just sports, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So today's conversation is about the relationship between Jews here in America and blacks, really spurred on by what's been going on in the media between Ye, aka Kanye, and Kyrie Irving. Those two characters have been saying some interesting things as it relates to the relationship between blacks and Jews, and it was a conversation I really wanted to have. So before we get to that conversation with someone I think knows a lot about the subject, I want to urge you to subscribe to the channel. I want you to hit the thumbs up that tells Google, hey, this is an okay video. You can spread it all around the web, and also hit the little bell and you'll be notified of other videos when they're published. This is going to be important because it's going to be a two-part conversation, so you're going to want to wait for part two. Without further ado, though, I had a chance to talk to Andrew Esensten. He's an American journalist and ethnographer with a BA in African American Studies from Harvard University and an MA in Middle East Studies from Tel Aviv University. He's a staff writer at the Israeli newspaper Haaretz and is currently the culture editor at a Jewish newspaper in California called Jay. He's writing a book on the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, a community of more than 3,000 African Americans, expats, and their offsprings based in Israel. He's also a big fan of the LA Clippers. We'll dismiss that for a moment. It is a great conversation. I want you to watch. Maybe you'll learn something. Hopefully we all learn something from this moment. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Andrew Esensten. Andrew, thanks for joining me today. It's a pleasure to finally get to talk to you. I know what we're about to cover is pretty complicated, and there's no easy answers to any of it, but I think it's really an important conversation to have, considering what's been in the news over the last month or so. Because, you've been researching topics like this over the last 15 years or so. You've had a chance to cover it not only here in the United States, but over in Israel as well. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of experience with a lot of this subject matter. So let's start just very broadly from what I like to call the 35,000-foot view, which is kind of like let's go over the historical relationship in your mind between blacks and Jews. In my mind, as a Reform Ashkenazi Jew, I've always kind of looked at that relationship as we should be locked arm in arm, right? But I'm not sure that's been the case. So how do you see that relationship as it's developed over the centuries and years here?
Yeah. If we're talking about the relationship between Black people and Jews in America, that goes back to the beginning of the slave trade. And it's true that Jews owned slaves. It's shameful. That's part of our history. But they were not major slaveholders because they lived in cities. They didn't live in the countryside or own plantations. And they certainly didn't orchestrate the slave trade, which is a claim that, for example, the Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan has made in the past. And that belief is neither true nor helpful to raise these days when we're trying to bridge this divide between Black people and Jews in America. With the Great Migration, which happened in the 20th century, beginning around 1910, millions of Black people started moving to cities in the North and came into more contact with Jews there. And for the most part, there wasn't great tension between the communities. But in the 1960s, it really, that relationship kind of fractured. And there's a famous essay by the writer James Baldwin on African Americans who hold anti-Semitic views, and he goes into detail about some of the reasons why this may be, and he points out how a lot of Jews were landlords, and they weren't attentive landlords, and how they owned businesses and they may have exploited Black people. And so there are grievances that have built up over time that Black people have, and they're not imagined grievances. I mean, we need to take them seriously. But I do think it's important to say that Black anti-Semitism is not a helpful phrase. It doesn't describe a real phenomenon. There are Black people who hold anti-Semitic views or views that we Jews might find offensive for one reason or another, if they're ahistorical, but not necessarily anti-Semitic. But we don't want to generalize about any community. And so the situation with Ye, formerly Kanye West, and Kyrie Irving has exposed some rifts within that relationship, which is sad, because as you were alluding to, Black people and Jews have a lot in common as minorities in the U.S. We've had similar struggles for acceptance, and certainly during the Civil Rights Movement, Jews played a big role in terms of supporting that movement, supporting Black leaders. Everyone, or many people, know about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a close confidant of Martin Luther King. But of course, there were other not as famous Jews who were involved in that movement, and so the history between these two communities is certainly complicated, and it's not irreparably damaged with this situation, but it could be strengthened. Let's put it that way.
You talk about a relationship that could be strengthened, and I'm sure as this conversation progresses, entities like the ADL and other entities on both aspects of this relationship will probably have some conversations about how we can strengthen those relationships. I'm sure that's coming down the road here.
And I think one of the stipulations for Kyrie Irving, who is a professional basketball player for the New Jersey Nets and who promoted an anti-Semitic film on his Twitter feed, and was slow to apologize, and therefore was suspended by the Nets for at least 5 games. One of the stipulations for him to return to the team was to meet with leaders at the ADL and to do something called anti-Semitism training. I found that to be a strange turn of phrase, but I think it just means sensitivity training around anti-Semitism.
So, a lot of people in this country, especially, non-Jewish people, Gentiles, that don't have a strong connection to the Jewish community, might be surprised that there are actually Black Jews and Jews from Africa, and Jews of all colors and country backgrounds and all of that. Can you talk about that a little bit, just to kind of set the record straight, as not every Jew looks like me.
Yeah, that's very true, and this is a topic that's close to my heart. For several years, I worked at an organization based in San Francisco called B'chol Lashon, in every tongue, in Hebrew. You can visit the website at globaljews.org. And the goal of the organization is to raise awareness about the ethnic and racial diversity of the global Jewish community. And this is not a new phenomenon. There are African Jews and African Jewish communities, and they've existed for centuries. There are also Black Jews in America who have been Jewish for generations, and not just because they may have converted to Judaism. There are long traditions of practicing Judaism, both in Africa and in the United States among Black people. So I think the fact that people are not aware that Black Jews exist and that, in fact, their numbers are growing in the US is probably a reflection of, bad education, and also kind of the prevalence of stereotypes about who Jews are, which have been promulgated through the media, of course, through television shows and films. But indeed, there are Black Jews, and they're very proud of their heritage. And there was a community in southern Africa called the Lemba, in South Africa and Zimbabwe. And in the early 2000s, some genetic testing was done on members of the community, and it was found that they have the genetic marker of the Kohanim. The Kohanim is the priestly class of Israelites that is descendants of Aaron, the first priest, Moses' brother in the Torah. And so this is one piece of evidence that people often cite to demonstrate that Judaism has been alive and thriving in Africa, since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. Jews are a diasporic people. Let me say that again. Jews are a diasporic people.
Yes.
It's a mouthful, but it's true. And so we have to recognize what that entails, and essentially to state it plainly, that means Jews, because of the exile that they were sent into, migrated all over Africa, all over Europe, and as a result of the slave trade, were taken from Africa to America. And so Jews have long been a very diverse people.
Now, what we just talked about there, what you just spoke on there, is completely different than what's been known as the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. And that's a different ideology altogether. And it's kind of been the subject matter of what Kanye, Kyrie, and some of these movies and books they've been talking about are about. Can you get into the BHI movement, what that is, its history? You wrote a great article on it. If anyone wants to go Google that, that was a real big explainer for me, your article that you wrote. But for those that are watching, maybe a little bit of a synopsis there.
Yeah, thank you. It is true that Black Jews and Hebrew Israelites are separate communities, and neither likes to be conflated with the other. And so if your viewers take anything away from our conversation, I would hope it's that Hebrew Israelites are, for the most part, not considered Jews according to halakha, which is Jewish law. And in fact, they don't even seek recognition from the mainstream Jewish community for a variety of reasons. Whereas Black Jews, people who were born into the Jewish faith, are in fact Jewish according to Jewish law. And on top of that, Hebrew Israelites are very diverse. It's a relatively new spiritual movement, but over the years it has fractured many times, and there are numerous groups in the US, in the UK, in Africa, with their own leadership and their own beliefs. And so really the only thing that these groups have in common is a belief in descent from the ancient Israelites. So the movement itself was founded in the late 1800s in the American South by Baptist preachers who felt that who received divine messages indicating to them that Black people are in fact God's chosen people, and that they should be returning to the lifestyle described in the Bible, and that one of the reasons they had to endure slavery and oppression was because they had strayed from those teachings. And so this idea spread because preachers, would travel around the country and do revivals and preach this message, which initially was intended as a message of uplift for African Americans who were coming out of slavery and who had been disconnected from their heritage as a result of the slave trade. And I want to say here that you and I, as white Jews, we enjoy a lot of privilege, right? Not right, both because of the structure of our society and the way white supremacy operates, and the way white privilege operates in American society, but also because we have knowledge of our history, of our family history and our ancestry. And so many Black people don't have that. And it's really a tragedy of history. And I think that we should have empathy for those who are on a quest to reconnect with their identity and with their heritage. Of course, we have to draw a line, with the Hebrew Israelites. There certainly is a line between feeling a deep connection to the biblical narrative and feeling that one is a descendant of the biblical Israelites, and on the other hand, accusing Jews of being imposters, accusing Jews of stealing that identity, and also trying to suppress the knowledge that this secret knowledge, right, that Black people are actually the Jewish people.
Right. So, I want to look at that stuff from a scientific and data standpoint, DNA standpoint, in a little bit. We'll get back to that. Those are all good points. But what I want to get to is, because we're talking about the Black Hebrew Israelite movement and some of their ideas and whatnot. And I think, if I read the situation correctly, some of the materials that have been put out there recently, from the movie, book, stuff that Kyrie was talking about, kind of stems from that a little bit more. And especially the movie, that was a book, then a movie that Kyrie put out there that he tweeted about, which, we can argue about whether he was promoting by tweeting, but he didn't comment on, and that could be a whole 7-hour discussion that we don't need to get into. But called Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America. I know there's been a lot of outlets that did a lot of research on this movie. People wanted me to go watch it with them they were going to prove me wrong, and it wasn't anti-Semitic, all of this stuff. From your standpoint, of studying this stuff, what's the deal with this movie, with this book? Is it right? Is it wrong? Where's it coming from?
So I haven't seen the documentary. It's 3.5 hours long, and I'd rather spend my time doing actual research,
right,
and not giving money to anti-Semitic directors. But from what I've read, there's a lot of objectionable material in there about the Jewish community and accusations that Jews were responsible for the slave trade, that Jews introduced racism against Black people into the public sphere. There's veneration of Hitler. There's Holocaust denial. So, really, really nasty stuff that is not specific to the Hebrew Israelite world. As I was saying, there are radical Hebrew Israelites who disparage and demean other groups of people, but they are a minority. Their numbers may be growing as a result of Kyrie and Kanye, or Ye, I should say, spreading this message. But in general, the Hebrew Israelite movement is peaceful, is not anti-Semitic. there's a debate over whether or not the claim that Black people are actually Jews is anti-Semitic or just offensive and ahistorical. I don't necessarily want to wade into that. I think, it's not my place to police people's identities. Identity is such a complicated personal thing. And I think people should be free to identify however they want to. But at the same time, they shouldn't question my identity as a halachic Jew, right? As someone born to Jewish parents. And that's something that the radical Hebrew Israelites do, and that should be condemned. And it seems to me that Ronald Dalton, who is the author of the book Hebrews to Negroes and the director of the film, is more aligned with the radical strain of Hebrew Israelites. This strain kind of grew out of the mainstream Hebrew Israelite world, beginning in the 1960s with a community called One West, which was based in New York City. And the leader of One West was Abba Bivens, who broke away from a mainstream Hebrew Israelite community called the Commandment Keepers. And so a lot of the kind of aggressive street preachers, street preaching Hebrew Israelites, are affiliated in some way with a One West group. Okay, so that's the more extremist end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, are communities like Rabbi Capers Funay's community in Chicago. He's the spiritual leader of Beth Shalom Synagogue. And he is both a Hebrew Israelite and a Jew, which is possible, just as it's possible to be a Hebrew Israelite and a Christian, for example. Now, I don't know if Ye actually identifies as a Hebrew Israelite. He has said before that he's Christian. He made a gospel album about Jesus. And so that would indicate that he's Christian, but he may also hold Hebrew Israelite beliefs. It's not clear. As far as Kyrie is concerned, he said he's an omnist on Twitter, which is someone who respects all religions. I know he has Native American heritage, which again doesn't preclude his being a Hebrew Israelite, but it's just not clear.
We're talking about the Hebrews to Negroes and that book, that movie, but this is not the first time that literature has been thrown out there that is anti-Semitic. For the longest of times, it was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, right? That was looked at as either extremely anti-Semitic or as something that some people held up to be the truth. It's been around for over 100 years, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Anti-Semitism is sometimes called the oldest hatred. And the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is an example of a text that was used to spread Jew hatred and to destabilize Jewish communities. It's a hoax. It's the contents of the book are fake. They purport to be internal meetings and conversations among a cabal of Jewish leaders who are seeking to control the world. And we know this is not the case. I mean, it's weird to have to say that, because Jews face so much oppression and hatred around the world. If we did, in fact, rule the world, one would think that we wouldn't be targeted and facing the threat of violence. But this is a conspiracy theory, right? And like most conspiracy theories, it tends to crop up during times of destabilization, and perhaps that's one reason why Ye and Kyrie their message is resonating with people. We seem to be in a moment of a moment of change, certainly in society, a moment of political destabilization, a moment of racial reckoning, right? So a lot of things are happening, and when people don't feel secure, don't feel safe, they look to blame another community, and that's often the reason for a spike in anti-Semitic violence.
We hope you enjoyed part 1 of the conversation, and we hope you stay tuned for part 2. Remember to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up, but hit the little bell, and that'll let you know when part 2 of this conversation comes down the line. In part 2, we talk about people like me and Andrew, white Ashkenazi Jews, our lineage. Have we been lied to, or are we really Jewish? And we talk about Kyrie's comment that he can't be anti-Semitic because he knows where he comes from. All of that and more coming your way in part 2. Stay tuned.